Um, Does everybody have this model? This one, they have it loaded up? Yes, no? Yep, they're both in the same file. Does everybody got it? There should be, they're layered. So, all right, so we're going to go through a number of things today. We're not just going to cover Lumion, we're going to cover some 2D representation too, as well as some like practice to make diagrams and stuff from Rhino. So we're actually going to start with looking at the 2D side of things. So let's go ahead and let's start with shelter 1. So turn that layer on. So we're looking at this one. All right, so to make 2D representation in Rhino, there's a couple of things that we're going to need, and a couple things we're going to need to do to get clear representation. So one of the things is we're going to type on the top. We're going to type in named views. It should open this panel. And then usually what I do is I take this named view panel, and you can just drag it here with all the other ones. Should be able to just drag it into there. There you go. So you should have this over here. Does everybody have the name views panel? So to go over it again, so the way that you open that panel is you type in named view, and you hit enter, and it will create this panel here. And then what you'll do is you'll just take that panel and drag it in with the other ones. So kind of unlike SketchUp, but also similar to SketchUp. So to create a section in Rhino, it's not called section, it's called clipping plane. So you'll type in the command clipping plane, and it'll ask you to draw the first corner and the second corner of a rectangle. And then it'll act just like a section plane, where it'll cut everything below it. You can rotate your clipping planes, change how they cut through. Does everybody have their clipping plane? So the way that clipping planes work is they aren't going to work in every single viewport by default. So if you go to the properties panel, so if you select the clipping plane and you go to the properties, you'll see that it has this list of views clipped. So if you go to like your right view, you'll see that it's not clipped. It's not trimming that. But if you click views clipped and you select the right view, now it will cut through. And the same goes for undoing that. This is something that a lot of people get stuck up on when they're first learning how to create these views, is they'll create a clipping view in one viewport and then not understand why it's in another, why it's not showing up in another. So to fix that, you select the clipping plane, you go to your properties panel, and you choose the view that you want it to be active in. Now, this is also really nice because when you create a named view, you can activate clipping planes in only specific named views. So what we're going to go ahead and do now is let's go to our top view. And let's set a top view over our didactic shelter. And we'll go to our named views panel. And from our named views panel, we'll click Save As, which is right here. It's going to say Save Viewport as named view. So we'll call this Plan View. And then we'll hit OK. And you'll notice now that it's named Plan View that the name of the viewport is no longer, it's not listed as top, it should be listed as Plan View. Did everybody get to this point? Any questions? All right. So now that we have this plan view, what we can go ahead and do is we can select our clipping plane. We'll go to properties. And we should be able to select plan view. Turn off our perspective. So you'll see that plan view is listed here now. So we'll list that as the view to be clipped. So now we can go, if you're looking in the perspective view, you can adjust where that clipping takes place, and it will happen in that plan view as well. Yep. Where from? You want me to start from? Okay, so you made your clipping plane, and then what you'll do is you'll go over to this properties panel, that rainbow circle, and then you'll see that there's this area that says views clipped, and you'll want to select whatever view you want it to trim at. So it'll say like perspective, plan, front, right. So you'll go down and that'll be the gumball setting. No, you're fine. Now, what's great about creating saved views or named views is that if, say we're in this viewport and we, somehow or another our view gets messed up, you can go to your named views. And when you double tap, it'll restore it to the view that you saved. So if you double click on your saved view, it'll restore that view in your viewport. Another thing is if, let's say that we change this view to like a front view, and we want it to go back to that plan view, you just double tap and it'll restore that view. So this is really handy when you start doing buildings that have multiple levels. You can set up, it's very similar to scenes in SketchUp. It's a very similar workflow. And then to control, what clipping planes are active and when, you just use the properties panel. All right. So now that we've kind of covered how to do the plan view setup, let's open back up our perspective view. So we're going to go over a couple of things when we're looking at this perspective view. So one of the first ones is a complaint that a lot of people have for Rhino is that the view that you have when you're modeling inside of it, it's very, like the view when you're modeling is great. It's very easy to model. But the issue is it doesn't really give you what a human perspective looks like. In SketchUp, there's that option to place the person and you get a very clear feel for what it's going to look like. So to recreate something similar to that in Rhino, what you'll need to do is, with nothing selected in the properties panel, you'll see that you have this view properties. And so by default, your lens length is going to be set to 50 millimeters, which is that's whenever you're modeling, keep it at 50. That's the best focal length to model with. But when you want to see, in Rhino, what it would look like, you want to change it to 20. And it'll give you, it's not perfect, but it's more of a human scale view. So that's good for, before you even throw it into Lumion, or, throughout your design process, if you want to get more of a, from a human perspective feel, that's kind of the workflow to go about that. And, you can save different named views with this as well. But let's go ahead and now let's set our focal length, or that lens length, back to 50. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to set up an isometric view. So we'll do the drop down panel for our window. We will go to set view, isometric, and let's see which one we like. Let's start with northeast. There we go. There's isometric northeast. So once you have your isometric northeast set up, we're going to create another named view. And we'll just call this isometric. So now let's go to another viewport, such as our right viewport. Let's go to our right, and we'll set up our view so that it's lined up the way that we want it. And we'll call this, we'll do another named view, and we'll call this our elevation. It might seem kind of silly or redundant to create named views when you already have the views now. But when you start modeling more complex projects and it's not as simple of a geometry, it becomes much more important to manage and create named views. All right, so now that we have these three different named views, what we'll go ahead and do is let's start here with our elevation. So the process for creating line work drawings for Rhino is definitely different than SketchUp. So what we're going to do is we're going to select everything in this viewport. What we actually want to do is that clipping plane is there, so we want to deselect the clipping plane by doing Control-click to deselect. And now that you have everything selected, we're going to type in the command make 2D and hit enter. And you'll see that when you do that command, it's going to bring up this this list of options. So for projection, you're just going to want to select view. For options, you're going to want clipping plane intersections on, group output. And then what you can go ahead and do is you can create a new layer for this view, which you're going to want to do. So we're going to call this our elevation. And then we'll hit OK. So now what you're going to want to do is, without clicking anything else, we're going to go to a top view. So we'll set one of our views to top. and you'll see that it created 2D lines or curves of that view. So if you select these are all different curves. Did everybody get to this point to the make 2D? Okay, so we'll go back and we'll repeat that. So start off, do you have your elevation view? Okay, so from here, you're gonna type in the command, make 2D. You'll hit enter. It's gonna say select objects to draw. So you'll select all of these objects. And then you'll hit enter. And these are the settings that you're going to want. So for your projection, you'll want it set to view, object properties by output layers, clipping plane intersection should be checked, and group output should be checked. And then you'll want to, it'll ask for a layer name, and you're going to want to name that layer so that you can keep everything organized. So it's just good practice to name it like whatever it is, so elevation in this case. And then you'll hit OK, and it will create, it'll take a second, and then it will create 2D lines. And these lines are always projected into top view. So you'll have to set your view to top after you do make 2D, and then the lines will be there. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's do the same thing for our isometric. So we'll open up, we'll set our isometric view. And we're going to select this model again. We're going to control click to turn off the clipping plane. And then once again, we'll type in that command, make 2D, and you'll hit enter. This setting should be the same, but we're just going to change the layer name to isometric. And then hit OK. So now if we go back to our top view, we'll see that there's a 2D line drawing of our model. Now, as your projects start to become more complex, the more complicated they get, the longer the make 2D will take. So if you have a very complicated project, the make 2D will take significantly longer. Like me and one of my buddies, for our last studio project, our make 2Ds can take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the complexity of your project. So the best thing to do when you're doing make 2D, if you have a complex project, is any geometry, anything that you've modeled that isn't necessary, you want to hide it, because every time while it's doing that make 2D, it's trying to figure out what's an important line and what's not important. So you want to reduce the amount of thinking that Rhino has to do. So for our last view, we'll open up our plan view, and we'll select our clipping plane, and we'll go to our properties because we need to make sure that it's activated in plan view. And then from our plan view, we'll do the same thing. We will select our model, deselect the clipping plane, and type in the command, make 2D. And then we'll rename our layer, and then hit OK. And what we can do is we can go ahead and move these separate from each other. So. Now what I like to do is once you get this line work, you get all this line work, I like to group each bundle of lines. So you just select the lines, you'll type in group, and then to repeat a command, you select and you right click, and you'll select, and then you'll right click again to repeat a command. Now that we have these lines, so another thing that I like to do is I like to keep So while you want each of these line works on their own separate layer, it's helpful to have all of the lines together in one layer that you can turn off and on. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our layers panel, and we're going to create a new layer, and we'll call this layer line work. And then what we'll go ahead and do is we'll drag and drop each of the layers that we made, the elevation, the isometric, and the plan view. We'll drag and drop each of them into that line work layer to create sub layers. This is nice because it makes it so that, when we're modeling and we don't want these lines getting in the way, it's just very easy to just turn them all off. And when we go to actually export these into Illustrator or Photoshop, we'll want to be able to turn only specific ones on. So let's see. We probably don't have time to kind of work through it, but the process for creating like an exploded axon is basically what they'll do is you'll work in your isometric view to create that axon or that exploded ISO. And then what you'll want to do is like this project doesn't really explode very well. Like maybe you could take those columns out, but that's really it. It's more of like 2 elements. But if you had if your didactic bus shelter had all these different components that somehow assemble together, what you would do is you would select each and you would just move them vertically in this view. Or if you're going to move them out, like you could move them out. And then what I recommend is, so let's say whatever view you're working in, let's say you move these out. Instead of trying to guesstimate where your lines would be when you go into Illustrator, it's much better to just draw a line that's going to be parallel to that projection. And you can do something like scale 1D. And then you can create that line. So then when you go into Illustrator and you do the make 2D, this line will become that dashed line. So there's no like guesswork with how things should land. You do something like this and you know exactly where it will go. So yeah. All right, so let's go to like a top view. Let's go back to the top view that has all of our views in it. From here, we're going to talk about exporting, export options, and exporting to scale. So if we start with our, let's turn all the other ones except for our isometric off. So let's have just our isometric. And then to export, we're going to type in the command print. So when you type in print, there's going to be a whole bunch of different options. So it's going to ask you whether you want to export it as an image file, which will usually be a PNG or a JPEG, or it'll ask if you want to do an Adobe PDF. So we're going to want to select Adobe PDF so that we get the line work. And then when you select Adobe PDF, you'll see that it's going to have this output type. Because we want to take this more than likely into Illustrator, we're going to make sure that our output is set to vector instead of raster. And then what we'll go ahead and do is we'll just hit print. And we can name this, we'll name this isometric. Is what? Did you so command print? PDF is the important thing. If it says Adobe or Rhino, just as long as it ends in PDF, you'll be fine. It doesn't matter if it says Rhino or Adobe. You just want the PDF so you can get that line work. It should be fine because it's all vectors as long as you select vector instead of raster. But to change the size of what that looks like when you print it, so if we type in print, and we have these settings, you have your Adobe PDF, and you have your document. It's set to vector output. So it's going to have view and output scale. And so right now it's going to print based on how it looks in the viewport. But if you want it to be closer to the object, there's this selection here that says window. So you'll click on window, and then you'll hit set. And then it'll say drag to define print window. So you'll click and drag to define how it should fit on a page, and then hit enter when you're done, and it will resize it to fit on the page. All right, so let's turn off our isometric. Let's turn on our elevation. So it'll be the same process. We'll select our elevation. We'll type in the command print. And if you set window before, you'll want to change it from window to viewport. So now it's back to your viewport. And now for, when you're doing a digital presentation, it's, scale isn't a big deal. When you're printing, scale starts to become quite important. So, there's all these different options for the scale of your drawing. There's 1:1. There's all the sort of ratios. Then they also offer the inch to foot scales, the most common ones. So if you say you want it to be at 1/16, that's 1/16, or maybe you want to do 1:1. That's way too big. 1/2 to 1. So you can, whatever scale you need, this allows you to export to a scale by selecting the scale under this option right here. Additionally, if you don't see a scale that you like, you can also just create your own scale. It has this here where it says on paper equals in model. So that's another way that you can set up your own scale. So we can go ahead and let's do 1/4 inch for scale. And then we'll go ahead and print. And we'll call this the elevation. And then after we have that one, we just have one more left to do, which is going to be our plan view. So we'll turn off the elevation, turn on our plan view. We'll select our plan view. We'll type in print. Now, another thing is, sometimes your projects, you'll need your floor plans to be to a scale, and the size of the paper will be too small. So you can also change the size of the paper that it'll export onto. So there's all these different options. And then another thing is you can create your own paper size. Let's see, somewhere around here. So yeah, you'll go to this properties here if you needed a larger paper size, like a custom one. And then, it says Adobe PDF page size. And then you can go to add, and this will allow you to create your own, size. But, we should be fine with this scale. So we can keep it at 1/4 inch, and we can do the same thing where we will print as a vector output, and we'll name this our plan. And you'll also notice that when it exports, similar to SketchUp, any lines that were cut by that clipping plane are going to be a heavier line weight. So another thing that can be for diagrams, something else that can look very nice is if we go to our named views, let's go to our isometric view. Let's select our clipping plane and type in hide. Now we're going to click on this drop down here, and we're going to set the viewport to Arctic. Now, something that, as you begin to become more comfortable in Rhino, similar to SketchUp, you can create your own styles for how a viewport looks. So one of the things that Arctic does is when you set up an Arctic view, you can still see the curves, which you actually, for what I'm going to show you, you don't want any curves when you export. So if you see curves in an Arctic viewport, you can type in the command cell, SEL, CRV, to cell curve, select all the curves, and then we'll go ahead and hide those curves because we don't want to see them. So then the next thing we're going to do is from our isometric named view, you're going to print. Now, this time we don't want to print as an Adobe PDF. We want to click the drop down. We want to pick an image file. And with our image file selected, you want to viewport. Scale isn't really necessary. Yeah. So you'll have this set up. Make sure that it's set to image file. You'll want it to be at least 300 dots per inch. And then with that done, we will print it. And we're going to name this. We will name this isometric shading. All right, so now we're going to hop into Illustrator and Photoshop. So go ahead and open up Illustrator on your computer, as well as Photoshop. So once you get Illustrator open, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do File, Open, and we're going to go ahead and find our PDF, our isometric PDF, and then open that. So from here, you could very easily, you can select everything on here. We can go to our, our layers panel, and we can actually just lock this entire layer here. And then we can create a new layer. And then we can use our pen tool. And with our pen tool, we can create with our pen tool. With our pen tool, we can create an outline that would go around the entirety of this. No. you probably spend more time than what we'll do in this class for actually outlining it, but just to get the idea. So you'd outline the whole thing. Create outlines in the openings. And then you can select, So, another way that you could do it is you could copy all the lines and then outline it like that. I mean, either's fine. A lot of times when you add a thicker line weight, it'll hide, any, issues that you have. So you add a heavier line weight to this isometric. And maybe the so maybe the actual structure itself, maybe the structure has a some sort of heavier line weight than the surrounding context. Let's actually select that again. So, just to get the idea across, you could outline it. Another way you could outline it is, you could actually select everything, copy it, create a new layer, and you would do edit, paste in place so that it pasted exactly right on top of the other one. And then you would just select all the perimeter lines, join them together, and then add a heavier line weight to that. But for this, I just kind of want to show the workflow for sort of creating a shaded diagram. I think it adds some depth to diagrams. So, so you have this line work. So what we'll go ahead is we're going to go into Photoshop now, and we're going to open the line work or the shaded of that isometric shading file. And then what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go back to our isometric PDF. We're going to select all the line work that we want. So select all the line work, Control C, so copy it. We're going to go into Photoshop, and we're going to paste it. And when you paste, it's going to ask how you want to paste it. And we're going to select the object. We're going to select Smart Object for how we want to paste it in, and then hit OK. So then, if I would have planned this out better. So if I would have planned this out better, I would have had this views lined up so you wouldn't have to scale it. So like if you would have exported both named views at the same scale, we wouldn't be in this predicament, but it's not a huge deal. You'll just have to scale it to fit that shaded portion. You get something like this. Okay, and so the reason that you want to paste from Illustrator as a smart object is because so now we have our line work layered on top of our Photoshop file. And we're looking at this and our line work doesn't look very good right now. So what we can do is if you double click on a vector smart object, and then you'll see if it doesn't open on its own, you'll see Illustrator's like kind of flashing. You open Illustrator, it will open. If you open Illustrator, oh, it's taking a second. So if you open Illustrator, now you'll see that there's this thing called Vector Smart Object. It has this crazy long name. But now you have the option to edit the line work in here. So, let's say that we so that we just select all of everything that makes up the shelter. You just select all these lines that make it up. Right now, it's not so much about perfection. I just want to try to get the idea across of what the kind of step-by-step process you would take. And so once you have your whatever lines you want, you could update the thickness of them. So let's say that's ugly, but you update the thickness of the lines in here, and then you save it. So because it's a Vector Smart Object, you will go into your Photoshop file and it automatically updates it. So this allows you to have the clarity of vector lines with the quality of a raster image. So you kind of get the best of both worlds with this workflow. And I do the same thing for plan views. If you want to create a sort of artistic plan, the best practice is to do the line work in Illustrator, do all of the line weighting, copy it into Photoshop, and then use the Vector Smart Object. That way you really get the best of both worlds with this sort of workflow. So you would use this, I've used this for elevations, sections, isometric diagrams like this. You can really use it for just about anything, and it allows you to have that instant flexibility to adjust all of your line weights. And then one more thing that I wanted to cover in Illustrator. So let's go ahead and let's open our plan view in here. So if you're not aware, one of the things that's going to end up being your best friend when you're doing any kind of line work is the selection options. So what you'll want to do is, as soon as you get your line work in, as you begin to line weight, you'll want to do select, same. And there's all these different options you can pick from. So you can pick same stroke color, which is going to select everything. You could do select, same, stroke weight. Oh, it's an isolation mode. Select same, stroke weight. You'll see that it's going to grab all those heavier line weights. And then by doing that, it makes it very easy. You can group all of them together. And then if you want to adjust all of them at once, you don't have to go back and keep selecting and deselecting all the different lines. It's really going to save you that time of trying to pick through all the lines to get them exactly how you want them. So by doing that and then managing all of that in your layers panel and your group panel, that's really going to help you. And the same workflow. So let's say that you have this plan and you wanted to somehow do something artistic with it. You would copy it, and then you could go to Photoshop. You do File, New, and then from Clipboard. So we'll just hit Create and Paste as a smart object, and it'll paste it in there just like that. And it's the same thing. So when you've got it in here, it's important to remember that as soon as you paste it in Photoshop, it's not tied to that original file you worked on. It's tied to the Vector Smart Object. So to edit this thing that's in Photoshop, you can't go back and edit this file, the plan PDF. That won't work. You'll have to go double click on the cloud, and Adobe will start flashing. And then it'll open the Vector Smart Object with a super long name. And that's what will instantly update. And to update, you make your changes and you save the file. I think that covers most of the that 2D representation. So we can go ahead and take a little break. And if anybody has like one-on-one questions, I can meet with you for a little bit. Or if you have any questions about anything that we just went over anything that didn't make sense, or you are wondering about a workflow, we can talk about that as well. But yeah, so we can go ahead and take just a break while we kind of do that. So if you guys aren't aware, so Ben Nowdit is a KU grad. He works at Populous. Phenomenal portfolio. If you want to see what great graphics look like, he is just phenomenal at representation. You can look at how he's created his plans. He has these very rich textures in every plan. You can see there's all sorts of hatching taking place. And his workflow is exactly what I just detailed. You start with your line work, you import it into Photoshop, you copy it and paste it into Photoshop as a smart object, and then you add all these textures either in Illustrator or you add them in Photoshop. Diagrams like this. Like just the level of detail in these sorts of elevations, you can really only achieve that by doing that workflow. You've got your Illustrator into Photoshop, and that allows you to have that best of both worlds. So yeah, definitely, if you haven't checked out Ben's portfolio, I have a whole bunch of links I'm going to send to Mary Alice at the end of today to pass on to you guys. But this is definitely, if you ever are like, well, I don't know, what good work looks like, definitely check out Ben's work. It's phenomenal. He did. He's an awesome guy. He came and reviewed our projects. Just a great guy. Yep. So, all right. So, before you export SDL select. Yeah, if you want to scale it. But there's not always someone there.
No, give another 2 years and then it'll be down to about 30%. And then 800 in 3 years.
Oh, I was gonna say. Thank you.
There. They can, I would just say, you know what? Yeah, I just.
Like I said, some of them.
Anybody else have any other? What's up? So, the ones here, with that, with those, it's not. You can keep this going. There's just, you're just saying, there's that, there's names, getting back, and there's so many. Another thing that might be easier is actually the scale might be easier in print, isn't print. Is that the question?
Yeah.
So,
I don't care. I would totally do that. That would be great.
Any other questions? I'll just go back up there.
All right, we go ahead and get back started. All right, so if you guys can go to like a perspective view and select this, turn shelter 1 off, and let's turn shelter 2 on. So go ahead and go through prepping your file for Lumion. All right, so one of the first things is how to assign materials. So materials are all going to be underneath this this like squished paint tube. And you'll see that right now it says there are currently no materials in use in the model. So what we can go ahead and do is we can create our own materials. So we'll hit this plus sign to create a new material. And we'll go to custom. And down here underneath the custom, there's all sorts of different options. Personally, for my workflow, I don't like to attach textured images in Rhino because I find that it bogs down the file. It adds way too much unnecessary information. So it's best, in my opinion, to just assign materials a color for what you want it to look like. So if you're doing concrete, you can, make it a gray. If you are doing some sort of, timber, you can give it some sort of brown. And then, that I think that's just an easier way to go about it. So to assign the color, you'll see when you click on the material underneath it, there should be this custom settings. And you'll go ahead and you'll click on color picker. And we can go ahead and let's make this one brown. So, go in between a red and an orange and make some sort of brown color. And then once you have that brown, we'll go ahead and hit OK. And we'll rename this material to like timber. So there's a couple different ways to assign materials two objects. One is that you click on the material and you drag it over and it will say assign. So that's one way. The way so if you're diligent in creating layers, so from the very beginning of your model, you're very intentional with how you layer things, what things are called. Instead, what you can do is you would go to your layers, and let's say that we want this enclosure. So we click on the enclosure layer. We do select sublayer objects. It would select all of those. Then you go to your materials. You would right click on materials. And you go to assign to objects. And then it would assign that material to all the objects. Now, something else you'll notice is when you're in your shaded view, you don't really see the materials. So, it's when you get a very complex model, it can actually be better to try to work. It's really best to work in shaded view as often as you can, because the more complex the model gets, the slower it becomes. And by adding colors, it adds another layer of processing that your computer has to go through. But if you want to see what it looks like, you could go to the different options. You could go to like rendered, and it will give you this rendered version of it. Artistic and pen should work too. It's having a stroke. As you, I don't have time to cover it today, but you can create your own styles too. So like I've created this one that I call like it's the equivalent of like a colored hidden line in like SketchUp. And if you just look up how to create your own styles, there's a ton of like tutorials on YouTube. And basically what you'll do is you'll like create a setting where it'll say that you just want the lines and the colors, and that's it, no shading. And this isn't a slow style either. I can take a picture of what my style settings are for this, and I'll send that to Mary Alice as well if you want to set up something like this. But getting back to like the materials, so a couple of important things to understand before taking something into Lumion from Rhino. So if we go ahead and so let's click, we've got this group of these here. Let's type in ungroup. Let's ungroup all of those. And so now that they're ungrouped, let's select one of them. Okay, so with the selection, there's two ways. So if you look at the top, it'll say one closed poly surface added to selection. Also, if you are in the properties panel, it'll say closed solid poly surface. Now it's important to read what the geometry is called, because so if we were to, like, let's say for this object here, right? Let's say we created a new material, a new custom material, and let's just call this timber 2. And we add a color to it. It's a different kind of brown. And with this new color, let's say that we just wanted, maybe this face. We only wanted this face to have that. Select with sub-objects on, you can select that face. You do assign to objects. So now you just have like one face of it that would have that material. Now the issue is, when you take this into Lumion, because it's a closed poly surface, it's only going to have one material or the other. It will not show both, or it'll just completely delete the geometry. Like it will not be in Lumion. So to solve this issue, what you have to do is you have to explode the geometry. So now it says instead of being a poly surface, it's 10 surfaces. So it's 10 individual surfaces. And then what you'll do is you'll group the geometry. So now it's very similar to a poly surface. It looks just like a poly surface, but instead it's 10 individual surfaces. So now if you were to take this into Lumion, now that it says that it's 10 surfaces instead of one closed poly surface, now you'd be able to see that this face has a different material than the other sides of it. Does that make sense? So what we'll go ahead and do is, we want all these to be the same material though. So let's just assign all of these to be, well, we'll assign all of these to be timber. So we have our timber material. Let's see. Let's create a different material for the benches. We can rename this to like, so we're gonna need two different materials for the benches. So we'll call one like bench one, and we're gonna want another one that's called like bench two. And we can color these however we want. Give them any sort of color that you enjoy. And so the reason that we're going to have two different benches, two different bench materials, is because when you import this into Lumion, the way that, have you guys all used Lumion before? Okay, so do you understand that like, when you have whatever you assign the material, like that material is the same throughout the entire thing, right? So like you can't adjust, like if you wanted it to look different on two different things, you can't adjust the direction of it or anything like that. So the reason we want two different bench materials is we're going to go ahead and ungroup these benches that they're different objects. And so now that they're ungrouped, we want the tops to be a different material than the bottom. So we'll make the tops bench one, and we'll make the bottoms bench two. Now, the reason behind this is when you go to assign your materials onto your object in Lumions, like say we want these benches to be wood. We want the direction of the grain of wood on the top of the bench to be in a different direction than the bottom of the bench. So that's why we want to make sure that we have separate materials so that we make sure that when we take this into Lumion, we have complete control over the direction and appearance of the bottom of those benches and the tops of the benches. So they're going to look like one wood, but it'll be two different materials. We can go ahead and we'll create another material for that beam. And we can just call this beam and give it its own color. You can select the beams, assign this material by assigned object. And then we'll create one more material and we'll call this like roof. We'll select the roof. Assign a color to it, something dark, and assigned objects. The last surface that we still kind of need to add in is, we've got this surface here, so let's just do, let's go ahead and do this. Let's do dupe border. So we're going to select this surface, dupe border to duplicate the edges of it, all of the edges. And then we'll hit enter. So now we have all of those edges duplicated. And then we'll do offset. And let's offset this 5 feet. Delete the geometry on the interior. So now we have this offset that we offset 5 feet. We'll turn that into a planar surface by typing in planar surface. We'll then select this surface and do the command extrude surface. And go ahead and delete our original surface. And we'll create one more material that we'll call like concrete. We can give this brown or a gray sort of hue. Are there any questions? Yeah, so what we'll go ahead and do is, so you have this this surface here. So you'll select the surface. You'll type in dupe border. And then you'll type in offset. We want to offset, and you'll type in 5 to offset at 5 feet. And then you'll hit enter. and then you'll select that curve, type in planar surface to create a surface. Then select that surface, type in extrude surface. And then we're going to extrude it 1 foot down. Then we'll go ahead and we'll create a new material for concrete. So we'll hit that, back to our materials tab. We'll hit the plus button to create a new material. And we'll make this one some sort of gray. And then we'll assign that to there. So now that we have all the materials assigned to it, so it's just good practice. Let's save the file. Let's go over something else. Something else I want you guys to know is if you go to the 3D warehouse, SketchUp 3D warehouse, do you guys all still have a SketchUp subscription? So if you go to the SketchUp 3D warehouse and you can look up something that you want. So like this, I don't know, bus stop sign. Let's see if we can find something like that. So no, you can find some sort of model. You can find a model on SketchUp Warehouse, on the 3D warehouse. You can download the model. And then from Rhino, you can actually import these SketchUp models. So do File, Import. It's going to ask you what you want to import. And you'll select the object. And you'll select Import as a mesh. You want these options on. Hit OK. And it'll bring that object from the SketchUp warehouse into your Rhino model. A lot of times you have to group things together. But so that's going to allow you to bring objects from SketchUp into Lumion or into Rhino. Since there isn't really like a Rhino warehouse, anything like that. So I think knowing how to do that is important because when you start to want to detail your scenes more, because before you even take it into a rendering software, the more detail that you can add to your model, the more realistic the rendering will be. Yep. So once you save it, so you'll save it to your computer, then you'll type in the command import. It's like if you have a SketchUp license, you can just download it from the SketchUp warehouse, like the website. And then once you download it, you can import it, and then you'll have all your different options. You'll want to import it as a mesh and then group it. Yeah, so the more rendering softwares, especially for photorealistic renders, like the issue with photorealistic renders is if you don't have enough detail in your model, it looks really weird, like it doesn't look right. So the more detail that you add to your model and the more detail you can add in post-production, the better it will look. Because models that lack in detail, realistic renders really make that very obvious, because it looks so real that things that are out of place become very apparent. So that was, all right, so we got assigning materials, importing from SketchUp. Do any of you have like Rhino on your laptops? Yes? Okay, so if you're using the desktop, you can't download this because the content thing, it's going to block you from downloading this. But what I highly suggest you do is you go to this website called Food for Rhino, and you're going to look up the Lumion live sync for Rhino. So it's going to look like this. What you'll have to do is, if you downloaded Rhino, you already have like some Rhino account. Like whether you know it or not, you have a Rhino account. So you can log into your Rhino account to access Food for Rhino. So that's what you'll do. And then you'll want to download this Lumion live sync for Rhino. when you download it, you're gonna have to restart Rhino for it to, update. But then you're gonna have this option. So when you open Rhino, like I have this Lumion panel here, where I can start a live sync, and I can also export as a Collada file. Not to say that you absolutely need this. You can get around this. So if you're using a desktop, if you're on a desktop right now, so we're going to get ready to take this over to Lumion. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to File, Save As, and under the options, we want to save this as a Collada file. So we'll say collada.dae, and then we'll hit Save. Did everybody get that? Any questions? Awesome. All right, so if you don't have Lumion open already, let's go ahead and let's open Lumion. And if you're going to open Lumion, it's good practice to close anything that's not necessary, because it's going to slow everything down. All right, so does everybody have Lumion, or are people still getting Lumion open? I know it takes a while. Huh? The website? Oh, so the file save. Or file save. My bad. And then under the drop down, on the file type, a lot of I'll save it as that. Who has, can you raise your hand if you have like Lumion already open? So does everybody else not have it open yet? All right, okay, so just we'll take a minute, because I know it takes a minute to start out. Yeah, so let's go ahead and open Lumion. And while we're waiting, so once you get it started, I'll take this time while it's loading to share a couple things on here that will be very helpful. I'm going to send all these links to Mary Alice, but these are just things that I wish I had known as a second year. So one, this website called Architextures, high quality, seamless textures for renderings. And there's all sorts of options that you can pick from. I mean, there's more than you'll ever need, and they have it all organized. It's all free. And most of them are customizable too. Like you can make some sorts of adjustments to them. So this is very good, because sometimes, you want a specific texture, but you can't find it. You can't find exactly what you're looking for in Lumion. So this is a good way to find that material and then bring it into Lumion, because all of these are high quality images. The next thing is this. If you are looking for some sort of image and you can't find a high quality version of it, I highly recommend you can get this Adobe stock free for 1 month. You get 10 downloads, and then you just cancel your subscription. And you can do this as many times as you create an Adobe account. So this is a great way to find like isometric people, silhouettes of people, line work people, anything like that. Trees, plan view trees. This is like a great resource to find high quality images, and they also come in AI files. You can find all of that on here. Like I said, free. You just have to make an account, just download them, cancel your account, make a new one. That's what a lot of us do. Let's see, another great one. So this is for elevations and sections. There's this website called Pimp My Drawing, and you can find they have ones that you can purchase, but they have a lot of ones that are just free. So these are all just different line work people, and they come in an AI. So they come in an Illustrator file, and they're already line weighted and grouped. So it's really saving you all the hassle, and it kind of brings your drawing to another level. So you can see there's a ton of these that you can pick from, and then there's ones you have to pay for. But a lot of these are just free. So take advantage of as much as you can. Now for your renderings, please, when you render, do not put Lumion people in your renders. Please, they look so bad. We had a reviewer my second year who he said project was great, but he could not stop looking at the Lumion people because he said they just look like something's wrong with them. Like one of them, when he rendered, his face like got sucked inward. Like it's just stuff like that where they just do not come out properly. So you can have a great rendering, but those Lumion people will just ruin it. It'll ruin any sense of realism. So the solution to that is Mr. Cutout. If you aren't familiar with Mr. Cutout, you create an account, you get a set number. I don't remember how many it is a day, but you get a set number of free downloads per day. So it gives you access to people, vegetation, animals, objects, vehicles. They have all sorts of things you can download, and they're free, so many per day. So my suggestion is, as you start, getting ready to do your final renders, each day, max out your downloads. Have an idea of what you want in your render and start downloading those every day leading up, because you don't want to, if you run into an emergency and you need more people, you can buy, a certain amount. I think you can buy like 60 downloads at a time, but it's just better to not have to pay for it at all. Two other really great resources. If you don't know how to go about a process for creating some sort of visualization, this is by far one of the best resources out there. And this is completely free. It's called Visualizing Architecture by Alex Hogreef. Phenomenal guy. He goes through the process for creating just these absolutely incredible renders. And he doesn't leave it up to you to figure out. He shows you exactly how he goes about creating these using softwares like Lumion and V-Ray. So if you want to elevate your work and understand that workflow for how do you create these stunning graphics, and not just renders, he goes through diagrams and plans and sections. Great resource. Another one is Upstairs. If you haven't heard of it, he is also another great guy. He details how to create diagrams, plans, just all sorts of representations. So those are two great resources for creating representation. And then finally, so this is something that our studio found out about last semester. And it's it's basically like a supermarket for architects. It has free products that you can get, like free, cutouts of people, collage style people, line work people. But something we decided as a studio is that if everybody in the studio pitches in like 25 cents, you can buy these huge packs of people for elevations and sections. You can buy assets for plans, and it's just a really great way to elevate your drawings to another level. Does everybody have Lumion open now? Yes? Perfect. All right. So I'm going to send all those to Mary Alice, and I'll kind of write about what to use each one for. I'm also going to attach Ben Nowdit's portfolio so you guys can check that out. So from here we're going to go ahead and we're going to do create new. Marie, okay, I'm so sorry. Marie Elise. Well, I'm sorry. Marie Elise. Marie Elise. All right, so now we're going to go and we're going to do create new project, and we can go ahead and do you can pick whichever environment you want. For this, we'll just do a plain environment. My suggestion is, if you know where your site is located at, it's very similar to modeling the rest of your project. Take the time, model your site context. It'll look better. It'll add a sense of realism to it as well, rather than just being located in the middle of a prairie or a flat grassland. So does everybody have some sort of Lumion file open? Yes? Awesome. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to imported models. We're going to go to place. This is hopefully not going to crash on me. Okay. So if you do imported models in place, it's going to bring up this thing. It's going to say import new model. So if you saved it on, if you saved it as a DAE, you should just be able to find it. Find that. You should, that collada file is what you're going to be looking for. It's going to ask you, what you want to name it. And then you can just import it in. Now, if you download that Lumion live sync into Rhino, you can just bypass this whole thing and just already import it. You can just import it just by having it in there. Has everybody gotten the model in? Do you want me to go through that process again? Or do you just need more time? All right, well, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I think I don't want to run out of time, so I'm gonna keep going. Then you can look back and look back at it. So we have our model set up. So we're gonna go ahead and start assigning materials to this. So when you bring yours into Lumion, please take the time, model some context around it. You can actually Photoshop background context, but that foreground context looks a lot better if you model it out. So just take the time to do that. We can go ahead and start assigning materials. So we can select this timber here. And there isn't, like, I can't tell you the right or wrong way to do anything in Lumion, because everybody has their own way about going about it. And a lot of it is just trial and error. You just kind of find out, what looks good, what looks bad. And a lot of it is just, you spend hours just playing around until you get something that looks decent. So you can see this wood material the grain is in the wrong direction. So we can mess with the orientation of that. So, if I were to have you guys go back and do this again, something you probably want to do is you actually want to create another material for the top, because this looks kind of odd, because you want your wood grain to go vertical here, like you can see here, but on the top you would actually want it to run horizontal, because like I said, the downside to Lumion being realistic is when things don't look right, it's very, very obvious. So when you render this, it's going to look kind of bad. So that would be my recommendation. If you have anything where the wood grain changes, create another material to change the direction of it. Another thing to keep in mind is your reflectivity and your gloss. If you have that way too high, it just makes your whole model look like it's drenched in lacquer. It just looks like it's overly shiny. So for the most part, you'll want to keep that down. And we'll set a material for this beam. We'll go to our woods. We'll find another. Actually, we can select this one. We can copy this material. And then we can paste it there. And then what we'll do here is, once again, we're just going to change the direction of this until it looks right, something like that. We can keep doing this for each. Each part of this. Just You can add colorization to different materials. So if you want something to be a little bit darker, you can adjust that as well. Now there isn't really, there's no right or wrong way to do things in Lumion. So you can just keep going through, assigning each material, making sure you get the direction of the material the way that you want it. You'll turn down your reflectivity, your gloss, copy this material. Let's see. Once again, you can go down and change the orientation. This is why we did those the two different materials, because we want this to actually go in a different direction. We want that to go up and down instead. That looks better. Like I said, yeah, just play with the reflectivity and gloss. A lot of times, I don't know why it's defaulted so high, but it just looks very weird. But anyway, so you go about your process, you assign all your materials, and there's not a lot I can tell you there as far as materials go. You just have to really play around with what you want. If you wanted to import a material or create a new material, the process would be you'd go to your material library, you would go to new material, standard, and it's going to say for let's see, polarization. It should be, no, that's that. That's what it wants. How do I? Oh my goodness. It's been so long since I've created a custom material. It's somewhere around here. It might be under color map. Maybe. You can find that by Googling that if you need another material. The biggest things that I kind of wanted to cover about Lumion are some of the features of it that make it very that are very helpful. So when you go to place, there's options like you can place trees. They have a very wide variety of different models of different nature aspects. If you're going to use people, put them away from the camera, put them in the background, not in the foreground. They just look very bad. For lights, my recommendation would be most of the time, instead of trying to detail every single light, you can just get away with using an aerial light to light an entire scene. And cars are another good one. Now for something like cars and trees, the thing that I want to show is that is the mass placement features. So you can if you have cars selected, you can select mass placement, and it's going to ask you for the items that you want. So you can kind of go through here and you can find some cars that you'd like. You can add them to this mass placement. There's such a wide variety that you could pick from. And now that you have these cars in your mass placement, you can create a line where these vehicles should travel on. It's going to ask you the number of items. And maybe we want more. So this is very, the mass placement is very helpful when you start, say you're doing an aerial view, or you're doing some sort of view where you want that sense of realism and context. This is a great way to very quickly add cars. I wouldn't recommend having like this many cars, like, for a distance. You just want it to not look like it's an empty, there's emptiness. You want there to be this sense of, motion and activity taking place within your scenes. You can do basically the exact same thing with nature. And you can do line placement, and you can pick, just like the car placement, you can pick, these different items that you want to store along your line. And then it's the same process where you can along the line, you could place trees and such. And there's other options for along that line. You can choose how far off the line, the spacing between them, the number of items, the offset from the line. So should they be directly along the line, or should they be offset from the line, the direction of them. So especially if you have a lot of trees, and randomizing the direction is very good. It makes it so they don't look like they're just a copy of the same tree. So that's really the gist of mass placement. So like I said, the materials and that sort of thing, a lot of the scene itself, the modeling, the more modeling you do, the better it will look. The materials is something you just have to play with. And you have to play with it even more so when you go to set up your render scene. So say that we want some sort of symmetrical render where it's let's get rid of this tree. That's fine. Let's say we want some sort of like symmetrical render. And let's go ahead and let's fix this material here. I don't know why it's so shiny. Okay. No, actually. Like this. So you have some sort of like symmetry to your view. So to save a view, if you haven't used Lumion, you go to your photo and you would save your view down. You'd store your camera down here. And then once you have your camera stored, you start to, you want to set the horizontal eye, set the eye to a human perspective, and you can kind of play around until you get something that is kind of captures the essence of your project. So you can, you can navigate within your window, and then to save the view again, you would just store your camera again. Something else to keep in mind is when you are storing your views, try to keep in mind that one way or another, you're going to end up either photoshopping this Lumion symbol out, or you're going to end up cropping a line wherever that Lumion symbol is. So as you're creating your views, just keep that in mind, because like for this, like if you wanted to do a symmetrical view like this, what you want to do is you'd want to probably crop both sides of it so it still looks symmetrical, it doesn't look lopsided, or you'd want to take the time to Photoshop that Lumion symbol out of there. But so yeah, once you have your view set up, Lumion really does a lot of the work for you. You can just set it to realistic, and a lot of this is just playing with each of these until you get them the way you like. So like for the sky, you probably want to mess with the heading until we get some interesting shadows. You could get something that kind of illustrates that those are open. It's not this solid wall. There's this, they have some sort of opening to them. And you could have something very interesting that kind of illustrate that. Yeah. I will say the nice thing about a symmetrical render is if you do it in your portfolio right, so that you open and then your renders a full spread and that it lines right down the center of that spread. It's a very clean looking render. Gosh, I'm trying to think of, there's this director who just loves symmetry. He does like the Grand Budapest Hotel, and he did the Fantastic Mr. Fox. But if you look, yes, and if you look at the way that he sets up his views, they can become this very artistic expression. And you could try to capture that sort of essence with your renderings potentially. I'm not saying make all your renderings symmetrical. Do not do that. But if your building lends itself to some sort of symmetry, there's ways that you can kind of express that artistically. But yeah, so the awesome thing is the skies in here are pretty good, but there's all these different options for real skies. You can change the time of the day. You can change what kind of sky you're having, and it's going to automatically impact the way that scene looks and the shading of that scene. So once again, that's one of those things where you have to have an idea of how you want that scene to feel, and then really it's a lot of playing around, because you'll find that some of them just aren't quite right. So you've got your shadows. A lot of this you really don't have to play around with that much, because in my opinion, like things like exposure and color correction are better to do in Photoshop. Skylight, shadow, you don't really have to play around with that very much. So, we have this view. Let's go ahead and do this. So if we go and we render this view, so one thing is that, you have all these different sizes. So if your presentation is just digital, then I would stick to desktop or print, depending on how big the rendering is going to be. Usually you'll be fine with desktop for a digital presentation. But keep in mind, if you're printing and you're going to be printing a render very large, you're going to want to use print or poster. And if you use poster, if you're using a print, actually, if you're just printing in general, I need to exit out of this. Okay, so yeah, for the most part, you're going to be sticking with print and poster. Why is this? There we go. Okay, so if you're going to be printing on a large scale, another effect that you're going to want to add is print poster enhancer. So you'll add this to each render that you're going to be printing on a large scale. You don't have to change anything. It just needs to be enabled. And what this is going to do is it's going to make sure that when you print very large, no part of it is going to look pixelated or low quality. It's going to seem like this very high quality, large scale render. So make sure you have that checked on. So the image size might go up, but as long as you export properly as a PDF, you should have no issues. So the biggest mistake that a lot of people make is they export for screens, because at least when they're exporting digitally, is they see export for screens and they think, well, I'm exporting for something on my computer. Do not export for screens. Export just for print. When you do export for screens, it's keeping unnecessary information about your PDF, the links, the names of those images in your PDF. You don't need any of that to print. So, in that case, just export your PDF just as a print, and then just make sure the file, the quality is as high as it should be. But so, okay, so let's say that, we render this. So the most important things are obviously the render size, and then also understanding what these different outputs do. So the two outputs that you'll most likely use the most are this alpha sky map, which you just click to turn on, and the material ID map. And for the sake of rendering time, let's just go ahead and we'll just do like a very small rendering. So let's call this depends on what paper you're printing on. I found that, you know, when we printed on there's like the two qualities of large scale printing in the lab there. Yeah, the one that isn't like, you know, it's got no shine to it. That one actually makes them seem, yeah, a little bit darker and it kind of sucks the richness of the color out of them. If you are going to print on that paper, make sure you choose a slower print speed, because when you print on that one, it shows every print mark. But if you print on the, you know, the nicer paper, yeah, that usually, you know, it might darken it a little bit, but I'd say like the color quality, it's very, very rich. Let's go ahead so we'll put this this render thing in here. So it's gonna, you know, do its thing where it's gonna render this. And I just want to show why you choose those two maps. All right. So like you have those renderings. And let's say we went into Photoshop and we opened that rendering that we have. That's going to be under documents. So let's go ahead and we're going to open. All right, so what we want to do is we want to bring each of these in and put them underneath the original. So the maps that we selected were it was the material map and the sky alpha map. And the reason that you put these in is that, so let's say that we don't really like this sky. So let's go to Mr. Cutout and let's find a better looking sky that we like. Let's say something like this. Oh, want me to sign in. So normally I'd say use Mr. Cutout. I just don't want to sign in. Just what I'm looking for. Let's say that we find some sort of sky that we like. And we bring that into our file. And find a image of a sky that is that's already large. When you scale them up, it kind of ruins the quality of them. But just for the sake of explaining why you use the sky alpha map, so you'll use your magic wand tool, and what you'll do is you will wand tool, and you want to make sure that contiguous is turned off. And what we'll do is we'll just select this sky here, this white, which represents where the sky is. You go to the sky layer and you just do clipping mask. And so now you have a different sky and it does all the hard work for you. You don't have to spend the time selecting and deselecting. It saves you all that work. You know, the other thing is you have your materials map. And the nice thing about the materials map is, you know, maybe you see that, you know, this concrete is kind of missing some sort of texture. So we could go to like, oh my gosh. You find some sort of texture, maybe something that you could find something just for the sake of explaining this. So it'd be the same process, you know, you'd paste, oh, no. Okay. Let's try one. There we go. Okay, so you paste whatever your material is. And so this next thing that I'm going to show you is actually very useful. So some of you have like drawings and stuff, right, that you're going to put on your shelters. So to put those, you know, in your renderings, what you'll do is you'll save those images as like a JPEG and you'll bring them into Photoshop. And to make it so that they're not just like this thing floating in your render, you're going to do this thing called edit perspective warp. and you'll create a grid over your drawing. And so you'll create your layout. So it's going to say layout, and then you'll change it to warp. And now this is going to allow you to grab these points. It's frozen up. Doesn't seem to like me having Lumion and all this other stuff running. Okay. Let's close this. Come on. There you go. There you go. Okay. This is, sorry guys, I don't know why it's acting up. We're gonna go ahead and we'll kill Chrome too. Okay. Okay, now it's working. Okay, so you create that grid, and then it allows you to do perspective warp. So if you say you have something on some sort of surface that you have your image and you want it to go over some sort of surface, and you can align materials and such that they match up with the perspective. And then once you have it the way you like it, you can select it, and it'd be the same as like doing the same as doing the other one, where you'll use your wand, and then you would go to the layer, and then you just create a clipping mask to make sure you're on the right layer, and then we'll just create a clipping mask. Go ahead and turn those back on, and that's way too overpowering. But that's the gist of the idea. You could play with the opacity, so you get something a little bit more subtle, something that adds some more texture to your images. But let's say that one option is the easiest way is just to crop. But if you're going to crop, if you're doing something like this, crop both sides that it seems even. But otherwise, if you plan ahead and you kind of think, okay, where do I want to crop this at? You can just crop it out to begin with. The more complicated way would be, you could use something like the clone stamp tool, or you could use, we selected this area and we went to the original rendering and we did fill content aware. It does an okay job of just filling it. So it kind of saves you that effort. That's that, I'll do that again. So that's that content aware fill. So you select it, and then you'll right click on it and it'll choose fill, or you can just do content aware fill to begin with. Actually, no, just do fill content aware. That's faster. And then hit OK. And it usually does a pretty decent job. You'll see that there's some issues with like the shadow. Because that's like the only downside. So sometimes it's better to just do it yourself. Yeah, that's like the process that I would go about doing that. But let's look at something like so let's say that so we have this like filler text that I found. Go ahead and like scale this. You can scale this down. But if you can imagine, so like this could be like your notes or something like that, right? That you drew for the common book, and then to get it, so that it would match your rendering, go through the process of edit, perspective warp. You draw that grid over the text. It's the first step is layout, and then you'll have to click warp to change it. And this will allow you to, get that that text to line up however you want it. So if it's, I'm not quite sure, where you guys, want to put it. If you guys have plaques that you're going to model in there, or if it's going to go on some sort of wall, but then this would give you that option to do something like that. And then, you go through the process of, once you warp it, just making it seem right. Something that's kind of interesting is if you're doing something out of like wood or concrete. Let me see if I can show what I mean. So if you have something like, if you say that your plaque was going to go on wood or concrete, what you can do is you can change your style, the options to like multiply, and then it'll look like it's printed directly onto the wood or directly onto like your concrete, which I think could be interesting if you have like a wooden plaque, or if you have some sort of like concrete piece of your structure that it could go onto. Additionally, if you can kind of bypass the whole perspective warp. There we go. So yeah, that's what I would go about for doing that. The only other thing, so let's go over best practices for people. So if we can find, if we can find somebody that we like and bring them in. So let's say that, we want this nice lady to be in our renderings. So you want to scale her down so that she's at, some sort of appropriate height. So you'll play around with whatever scale she needs to be at, and then keep in mind that, a good rule of thumb is that like all of their eyes, for the eye line for everybody in your renderings, unless they're sitting down, it should all line up. So once you have your person, you can then make a copy of them. You can make a copy and you can paste in place. And then we can go to adjustments, and we can go to hue and saturation. And we'll turn this one saturation down and the lightness down, so it's just completely black. We'll put this one behind our other one, and then we can just warp it. Oh my gosh. Then we can warp it so that it should you can warp it so that it somehow lines up with these long shadows. And you'll see when you do it, it'll turn back to black. So you'll turn down your opacity, and then good thing to do is you go to like filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and you'll mess with the amount of blur so that it's not this perfect shadow. And then for each of these, you'll just have to kind of play around with how they look. Like she looks a little bit too too saturated, so you'd probably play around with her saturation. Maybe you desaturate her a little bit so that she doesn't look as out of place. Yeah, that's kind of the workflow for putting people in. My recommendation would be to Photoshop people in. Don't use Lumion people. Like the only place to use Lumion people is like if I were to draw, if you have people that would be like in the distance, like in this area back here for some reason, Lumion people are fine. But anything in the foreground or middle ground, just don't use Lumion people. Let's see if we can find my list. I'm trying to cover everything I can think of. Do you guys have any questions? Anything from today? So so I'm not a huge fan of the geolocation in Neon. I go to like, it's either CAD Mapper or there's another one like that where it does like the massings. I'll send the link to Maria-Lise, and it'll there's some different options for like it'll create the massings of the buildings, but a lot of times like if you're doing a photorealistic render, either all the context needs to be very like conceptual, like all white, or if you're going to add detail to the context, it needs to be very well detailed. Like it should be obvious this, this is a building, it's not a white block. So if you really go one way or the other, I would do both. So like, like that CAD mapper, it's a great base because it'll give you the massings and it'll give you the roads, but then you need to take the time to, like for your bus shelter, you're going to want to model like the curb, like there would be some sort of curb there. Things like that adds that next level of realism to your renders, and it just makes it a little bit more convincing. Yeah, don't do this. Another thing is if if you have access to where your context is, or if you have pictures of your context, you can take something like this and you don't even have to model it. You could just Photoshop. If you know what that image looks like and what that perspective for that image is, you can match that perspective with your rendering, and you can make it seem like your rendering is just in that location to begin with. So that's just something else to keep in mind. So, if you, it'd kind of be a tedious process because, what you would do is you would have, whatever your image is, like if you have like your image of, where that road is and where that site is located at. It's like, if you had any sort of, I'm trying to find a good one. If you had some sort of image, this isn't a good example, but if you had an image, like some image like this that you took and you found and it has what your context looks like, you can imagine before you even, create your rendering, how you want it to look in that context. And then what you would do is you would just go about basically masking this off and moving it into that rendering. So you would copy basically just the building and bring just the building into that other image. So if we, you'd have whatever your image is, you'd open it. So you'd have, whatever your context is. You could take, your building and, one way or another, you would Photoshop it into the context. You would, before you even rendered, you would want to like figure out, okay, if it goes over here, the perspective needs to be different. Like it can't be, how we had it before, because that won't look right. So, just, thinking of, you kind of have to plan ahead if you're going to Photoshop something into the context, because you don't want it to look like this, where it's just obviously skewed. It doesn't look right. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. To the homepage for Lumion. So I don't have Lumion open. It's like, are you trying to go to like the homepage for Lumion? So if you go to like, there's like a tab. It's where like the save and stuff is located at. So if you press that, it'll take you back to an area where it'll be like create new file and stuff like that. Are there any other questions? Yeah. Yep. yeah, if you guys have any questions or, about anything along the way, don't hesitate to reach out. Yes, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's on the syllabus. Let me go to, yeah.
Don't forget to text it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Let's